Welcome everyone. Everyone's joining the webinar room. Thank you for coming. We'll get started in just a minute. Everyone's joining in. Welcome everyone. Everyone's still coming into the room. We'll just give it another minute. Welcome. We're still ticking up just a little bit. Let some more people jump in the room. Hi, Christina. Welcome. Glad you're excited. We're excited as well. All right. Looks like we maybe have everyone in the room for now. Go ahead and get started. Welcome, Barbara. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to our first webinar in a two-part series today, focused on guided self-placement. Michelle and I are very excited to have you all join us. And so I'm Mallory Newell, and I am from the RP group and also the Multiple Measures Assessment Project, or MAP team project lead. And I'm joined here by Michelle White, who's a senior research analyst for the RP group, who conducted the research for the guided self-placement work that we're going to be sharing with you today. And we're also joined by Laney in Berkeley City College. And we have some of our ESL professors who are experts in their area of developing guided self-placement on their campuses that are going to share today. So first, Beth, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Hi, I'm Beth Waddell from Laney College in downtown Oakland.
Thanks, Beth. And Angela?
Hi, my name is Angela Jimenez Velayos, and I'm also an ESL instructor at Laney College.
Thank you. And Gabriel?
I am Gabriel Weiner, and I am from Berkeley City College, the smaller sister of Laney in Berkeley.
Great, thanks so much. So thank you to our campuses for being here to share their perspectives as well. So we are recording this session and we will post it on the RP group website for you to access. And we will also be posting the guide, the guided self-placement guide on the RP website as well, that you'll be able to access by, let's say, Wednesday of next week. So let's go ahead and get started, and we'll have time for questions after each presenter. But if you have questions, you can type them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we try to address them all by the end of the hour. All right, so our agenda for our hour together today is just a quick overview of what is guided self-placement, so we're all on the same page of the definition that the Chancellor's Office is using. And then just a quick review of AB 705 and Title V as it pertains to guided self-placement. And then Michelle will share the literature that has been collected that pertains to guided self-placement that we have collected from the academic literature, academic journals. And then we'll talk about ESL guided self-placement resources from our co-presenters, and then we'll wrap up with the current research in ESL that the RP group has planned for the rest of this year. So the definition of guided self-placement, guided or self-placement that the Chancellor's Office has adopted is guided self-placement or directed self-placement, which is often what it is referred to in the literature outside of California as this DSP, the directed self-placement. And it usually involves giving students information they need to make their own decision about the course level at which they should be placed. So it's really giving the students agency over their own placement with enough information. And Title V now has explicit information around guided self-placement under 55522.5 for placement methods. So in addition to districts placing English language learners using evidence-based multiple measures from the placement methods for ESL, which can include local research using high school performance data, including self-reported high school performance data. And then C is a district placement method based upon guided placement, including self-placement. So this is really where this stems from, is this newly incorporated post AB 705 focus on also being able to use guided self-placement to place students as an additional multiple measure. So as I mentioned, this is going to be recorded, and we'll post these slides plus the guide on the RP Group website here. So if you go to rpgroup.org under Multiple Measures Assessment Project, we have a tab that is specific to ESL, and that's where we keep all of our research that we have been working on for ESL post AB 705 implementation. So you'll be able to get these resources mid next week when we get them posted. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michelle.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about the impact of AB 705 and how it's affected ESL. We know that the initial placement for a student has a significant impact on how long they end up at the college, as well as the likelihood that they're going to reach their educational goals. So as we think about moving students into transfer level coursework, we want to examine how things have changed for students. All right, so when we think about the changes, let me go back one more. Okay, so I want to talk about the paradigm shift that's occurred as a result of AB 705. And when we talk about AB 705 implementation, we often point to changes in how we place students, modifications to the curriculum, the types of support we now offer students. But more than that, AB 705 created this paradigm shift in our mindset when it comes to students' capacity to succeed. So we wanted to go over some of those changes now, comparing what we used to do and how we used to think to how we approach students' placement, access, and success currently. So in the past, the focus was really on individual course pass rates, but now we're looking at a bigger picture. We're looking at examining pathways and attrition and completion across the ESL sequence. In the past, we were concerned about placing students too high, but after years of research and evaluation, we know that the real concern is in underplacing students and how that impacts their ability to reach their educational goals. Historically, it was the college's purview to place students, but now we inform students of their right to access both credit ESL or English courses. And then in the past, colleges relied on placement tests, whereas we're really focusing more on incorporating multiple measures for placement, so a more holistic approach. And then lastly, there used to be a firm placement for everyone. Sort of this one-size-fits-all approach, but now colleges are using guided self-placement that incorporates quantitative and qualitative factors rather than just having an assessment test be the end-all be-all. Okay, so we wanted to share some findings from a qualitative study that took place around AB 705. In the spring of 2020, the MMAP team, including myself, conducted interviews with colleges across the state to better understand some of the factors that influenced the varying levels and approaches that colleges took to their AB 705 implementation. And we wanted to share some of the highlights that pertain specifically to ESL. And what we heard from colleges was that implementation of AB 705 led to several innovations and improvements. So one of those things was increased communication and collaboration amongst faculty within ESL, but also between ESL and English departments, and between instructors and counselors. It also led to simplified and shortened ESL course sequences. We learned that colleges redesigned their pathways, and in some cases they integrated like the reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills into one class. Changes were made to ESL curriculum to better support ESL students in transfer level English. Of course, we know that colleges created all types of supports support courses, co-requisites for ESL students enrolled in transfer level English. And then in some cases, colleges actually were able to create a transfer level English equivalent course specifically designed for ESL students. So we wanted to share this quote that comes from an ESL department chair on their placement process. And this particular college actually uses guided self-placement. So it was very relevant for our discussion today. But it says, giving students more autonomy can often be empowering for students. The ESL department has seen that with guided self-placement efforts for ESL, students feel empowered by having more choice and control over the classes they take. So there's just really more autonomy and more ownership. And the placement process when using something like guided self-placement is much more student-centered. I also want to point out that ESL placement has really evolved a lot in this time we're dealing with COVID, and more colleges are moving away from like a test-heavy assessment approach to something that looks closer to guided self-placement. If you're interested in learning more about this study, I'm going to put links to the full report as well as a document that has kind of an overview of the key findings in the chat box for anyone that's interested in reading more about it. Let me do that really quick before we move on. So you know what, I might have to do that after. It looks like the links are not staying active. I'll pop those in the chat at the end of the presentation. All right, so we conducted a literature review to get a better understanding of the different placement methods used in ESL, as well as key considerations for colleges to keep in mind. So what we learned is that guided self-placement is becoming a more common approach to assessment. And what we found in the literature is that one of the major strengths in using GSP is the ability to adapt to the needs of students, programs, and colleges. So as you'll see later in this presentation, there are different tools and methodologies that colleges can use in their guided self-placement process. And really, it can be catered to the student populations they're serving so that they find a process that best fits their students. We also learned that GSP has been found to be a valid measure of assessment for English language learners and results in higher levels of success compared to other measures of assessment. So that's important because we want to ensure that students are placed appropriately and that they're ultimately successful in their courses. So what we learned was that the research really does indicate that guided self-placement is an effective placement method. And as you can see, there's a link to literature review on the slide. I'll also pop a link in the chat box for those interested in looking at the full lit review. All right, so we wanted to share some of the recommendations we pulled from the research that we hope assists college in designing as well as testing their GSP model. So one of the major things is just to encourage participation from ESL and English stakeholders. And so that means identifying at the onset who all should be involved. And what we found is that if you bring in kind of an interdisciplinary team, that really does create the most robust, sound GSP process. So that involves bringing in your instructional faculty, counselors, administrators, and then perhaps most importantly, student representation so that they can go through that process in either a pilot or, once the process has already been implemented and give you feedback directly on what they thought about the process and how effective it was. We also learned that it's important to explain the purpose and impact of the guided self-placement process to students. So making sure students understand why guided self-placement is being used, and then also the range of possible outcomes. So providing, what it is, but also how it benefits them is really crucial. And so that way they understand kind of the implications of the placement process, as well as what sequence of courses they're likely to encounter based on their initial placement. Giving students information about the GSP process in advance, including how to change or appeal their initial placement if necessary. So this mainly pertains to students who are underplaced, but offering some mechanism for them to move into a higher course, ideally within that first week of instruction, should they determine that they are actually underplaced. And then aligning placement tools with ESL course level curriculum. So this just ensures that the GSP tools that you guys or the colleges are using actually reflects the skills and knowledge that is required of them within each course level. So we'll learn about some of those different tools in this presentation, but this really helps them determine and make a more informed decision on which class they should enroll in. All right, so colleges can take a number of different approaches to guided self-placement, but we wanted to highlight some of the tools and practices we learned about when we spoke to colleges. And this can be used, you know, if you're just starting to develop a GSP model, or if you're looking to refine your model. We wanted to walk through some of these different strategies and practices that colleges use, so you can kind of see what the benefits and trade-offs are. So one of the main tools used is a student questionnaire. And so this usually involves capturing the student's background, skills, and abilities. And it typically comes in the form of a survey. So students will complete a survey and it asks them something about their reading and writing habits and experiences. Another tool that's used in guided self-placement is reading and writing samples. So with this approach, students are reading some sort of prompt, or they're given a writing sample, and those reading and writing samples correspond to different ESL courses. And then once a student either reads or looks at a writing sample, they then do a self-assessment to determine which example most closely aligns with their own skills and abilities. Another tool is can-do statements. So colleges can use a series of can-do statements to help students place themselves based on what they determine they're capable of doing. And so can-do statements are often presented as like a checklist and might relate to, you know, topic areas like daily life or personal experiences, or topics that are introduced in the classroom. Another way students can kind of create an informed decision around their placement is by providing them course information and expectations for each course level. So essentially what this does is just equip students with information about what each course will require of them, and how many courses are actually in the sequence. So you can provide things like course descriptions, course expectations, and then also providing the number of levels that that course is below transfer. Lastly, academic advising. So academic advising might be the most crucial aspect to a GSP process. And what it involves is providing some sort of counseling or guidance to help students make that final determination in the appropriate class to enroll. And then also they have an opportunity to kind of build out a timeline for how long it will take that student to complete their language requirements. And this is generally something that takes place after students go through the GSP process in terms of the tools that I just shared, the student questionnaire, going through reading and writing samples, can-do statements, and things like that. So the student will meet with a faculty member, counselor, or advisor, and they have an opportunity to ask questions, get clarification, and ultimately make a final placement decision. All right, so we wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, once a GSP model has been developed and implemented, how colleges can validate their placement methodology. So following implementation, colleges should evaluate their GSP model for both reliability and validity. And so some of the things you can look for when you're going through this process are inconsistent outcomes. So essentially, are you seeing students that have similar backgrounds and experiences being placed at very different course levels. If you're getting inconsistent outcomes like that frequently, then you know, okay, perhaps this is not providing me with reliable and valid placement methodology. The other things you can look for are biases, as well as cognitive overload. So how much effort is required for students to actually get through this process. You can look at your prompts. Are they too dense or too lengthy? And then you can achieve validation in a number of different ways. So some of the ways that we learned colleges are doing this is through norming techniques, also piloting. So if you're changing up your placement methods and you're going to something that looks more like guided self-placement, maybe starting out with a pilot and seeing how students respond and gathering feedback to make refinements before launching it in a more large scale capacity. And then also just that student feedback. So having some sort of mechanism where students can actually provide their thoughts and experiences, and you can make refinements from that direct feedback. Some of the specific aspects that you can look for in your validation to kind of make improvements are the clarity of instructions. So reviewing specific terms and phrasing that's used in the placement instruments from the lens of an English language learner. And so that's why having an actual student can really make a difference on getting valuable feedback. Also looking at the sequencing, formatting, and presentation of information. So this has to do with more of like the layout of your GSP process, whether it's in person or online. How much information is presented to the student at once, and whether or not that's the most effective approach to presenting that information. And then also consider the time required to complete the process. So not just the overall length of time required, but also the time that's required within each step. So if you're incorporating a self-assessment or you're having them review can-do statements, how long does it take them to do that? And is there anything that can be pared down to help students move through that process more efficiently? Okay, so when we interviewed ESL faculty and administrators, it was clear that institutions are approaching placement from a more holistic perspective. And it's not just what's happening in the placement process, but really what's taking place before and after all of these different strategies to kind of support student success through their academic journey. So we wanted to share some of the highlights from what we heard from colleges. One of the things we learned is that colleges are offering non-credit to credit support. Many students begin on the non-credit side and then want to transition over to credit. So colleges are offering workshops and accelerated bridge programs to help prepare students for credit courses and really clarify how those credit courses are different than non-credit and what to expect. Also offering a diagnostic the first week of class. And so this happens, this kind of relates to having some sort of mechanism for students to change or appeal their initial placement. But by doing this, essentially students complete some sort of essay or they write some sort of paragraph perhaps in the first week of class, and then with the faculty's guidance might determine, you know what, I think I might actually be underplaced. I could probably go to the next ESL course level or English. And so they have an opportunity to change that placement based on this diagnostic. Embedded tutors and co-teaching models is another thing we learned colleges are doing. So this involves providing some type of support in class through tutors or co-instructors. And what we determined was that it's really a combination of instruction and intervention that's taking place simultaneously. So the ESL instructor might be responsible for curriculum, let's say, but then the embedded tutor or co-instructor is really focused on providing support and helping with things like clarification and ensuring students understand the assignments. Direct outreach was another one. So this had to do with identifying students who either weren't re-enrolling, or who did re-enroll but were kind of not actively participating. And so advisors were reaching out to students to offer assistance and help them navigate obstacles that might be preventing them from participating or re-enrolling. And then lastly, this coordination and collaboration component. So this was obviously a recurring theme, but what we learned is that there is not just a lot of coordination and collaboration within ESL, but it's really across departments and with students as well. So this involved ongoing communication about the curriculum, providing comprehensive training on what acceleration is, partnering with student services so that everyone understands their role, specifically with assessment and counseling. So there was, as you can see, kind of comprehensive, holistic approach that colleges are really implementing in order to go beyond just placement, but really look at the full student journey. So at this time, I do want to turn it back over to Mallory, who's going to introduce our college speakers. We're really excited to hear from them today and their experiences in designing a GSP model. So I'm going to hand it back to Mallory to get us kickstarted on that section.
Great, thank you, Michelle. And I know some questions came into the chat in the Q&A. If you wouldn't mind looking through those as we proceed. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Beth and Angela. And Beth, you should now have the remote. Give it a try.
Thank you.
There you go.
So I wanted to mention that Angela and I are thrilled to be here, but we are also just two members of a larger team, which includes our colleagues, Christina, Karen, David, and Barbara, who are also here and who might make some comments in the chat if relevant. And so prior to 2020, our placement process at Laney was kind of onerous, as you can see, many steps for students to go through. And we've made it a little bit shorter in our post-2020 transition to guided self-placement, but we would still love to make it shorter still and more convenient for students. So if others have ideas or success stories to share with us, we are always really open to hearing about that and excited to hear about that. As for actual placement historically, which is up through December of 2019, students would take a placement test of the CELSA and do a writing sample of 30 minutes, which the writing sample would be graded by 2 instructors, and that would place them in their reading and writing class, and the CELSA would place them in their listening and speaking and grammar classes. Currently, students take an online guided self-placement, and that includes also a writing sample, which the students use to self-assess themselves. And that's used to, the guided self-placement puts them into all 3 of their core classes. And we also have a person called the ESL coach who is doing outreach to students, which I think kind of relates to a question that came up in the chat. So I wanted to just show you a snapshot of our students and where they're self-placing. And I mostly wanted to do this to point out that a lot of our students who come into our college are at the high beginning and intermediate level. So one thing that's really been at the core of our work has been making sure that these lower level of English students are able to fully engage with the guided self-placement, that it's accessible to them, and that they are able to not just participate, but actually take advantage of the benefits of guided self-placement in terms of student agency. A timeline of our group, we've been meeting, our team of about 6-7 faculty have been meeting every 2 weeks throughout the school year since the spring of 2018. So we've had a lot of time to talk and share ideas and do some planning together. We first piloted a paper and then browser-based version of guided self-placement alongside our traditional placement for a whole year before transitioning to placement by guided self-placement for the spring of 2020 semester. And that took place in a on-campus orientation setting. And Then we happened to make a transition to online guided self-placement in May of 2020 to replace the campus orientation. We have the ESL coach, who is, again, a faculty member. Like Michelle, we also did research and we could not, there's not exactly research that's saying, at that point at least, this is what you need to do for a community college guided self-placement. But we found some other information that we were able to use to inform our process, including this can-do statements that Michelle mentioned, or I can statements, we call them, which are describing what you should be able to do at a level. The research indicates that it's a pretty efficient and effective way. It's very fast, but effective way for students to self-assess. So we have that as one of the steps of our process. In addition, generally, it's easier for learners to self-assess their productive skills rather than their receptive skills, which does make sense if you think about it. It's easier for us to assess their productive skills than their receptive skills. And so that is why we have included a writing aspect of our GSP. And then lastly, there's sort of what's called the collapse towards the middle, where lower level students, compared to how a teacher assesses them, might rate themselves higher, but higher level students would rate themselves lower than how an instructor might assess them. So that has informed our process, in that we don't want like our higher level students to think that, oh, advanced is too hard for me or something like that. So we had to make sure that our levels don't look too unattainable, knowing that this might be something that's going through students' heads overall. And we used our pilot process as a way of refining that. Oops. So our pilot process, as I said, we did it for almost a year, or for a year. And so we were able to make a lot of changes through our observations of students, since it was in a face-to-face setting. So originally, we gave students a paper packet, which gave them sample writings that students at each level had produced in 30 minutes. And we asked them, which one is the one closest to your writing? The result was cognitive overload. How did we know that students were experiencing cognitive overload? They were putting their head in their hands and rubbing their eyes, flipping randomly. Students were kind of unable to tell us why they had chosen something, or sometimes they would tell us, oh, I understood it when I read it, which wasn't what we were going for. We were saying, could you produce something like this? Not just, could you understand something like this? So the productive receptive aspect. And then students with similar profiles were placing themselves differently, as Michelle had described, that being something to look for. So we made changes. And I'm going to show you what our current system is after all of these changes, and how we incorporated some of the stuff we learned through the pilot process and also our research. So we start with, first step is that students see I can statements for all 5 levels. And this is the only part of the process where they have to look at all 5 levels at the same time. So this is it's the first step of filtering students to avoid that cognitive overload. So they will look at this and decide which one seems to be a good match, and then go forward from there. We also have this button down here, which we call the parachute out. And that's for those students who are already feeling overwhelmed because actually they just want basic English classes. They don't know English yet. So for those students, they click that button and a friendly teacher named Karen or Christina will contact them and help them through the enrollment process, which is really a barrier for students at that level. We're going back to the GSP. So if a student chose level 3 on the I can statements, they'll get this reading, a level 3 reading. They can decide if they think this is their level, or go up or go down. They can go up to level 4, they can go down to level 2, they can go down to level 1, so they can see all of the levels that they want to, but they're only going to get 1 on the screen at a time. So that's part of limiting the cognitive overload. And then they are going to write. By the way, we tell them at the beginning to take about an hour for this process so they know it going in. We ask them to write for 30 minutes about this question. We have a timer. It's not an enforced timer, which means it doesn't stop them after 30 minutes, and it also doesn't make them go for 30 minutes. If they click I'm finished writing before 30 minutes, they'll just get a polite message saying, are you sure you don't want to write anymore? And we wanted to have this in there because it's very hard to abstractly think about your writing unless you've actually written something. And I forgot my other point, so I'll move on. And then when students finish writing, they will see their own writing here compared to another level 2 student. And we experimented with different placements like top and bottom, which was better. And we found that side by side worked best because students are able to really easily compare side by side the length and the complexity, the organization, vocabulary, things like that. Some people have asked us whether anybody actually reads the writing, and we can read it, but we don't use it. We don't read it as any part of assessment of the students. And other people say, well, if students don't have to write, will they write? And we have found that about 95% of them do write. Maybe like occasionally a student will not write, but it's very rare. And those who write tend to write a lot if there are higher level students. So then they are asked to compare and then choose, yes, this looks like me. Actually, I think my writing is more advanced, or actually, I think my writing is less advanced. So at this point, they're not going to keep going up and down the levels. They're not going to go all the way randomly because we don't want them to start choosing at random because of cognitive overload. So whatever they choose here is going to be their placement for the reading and writing level. Then we have I can statements that place them into listening and speaking. And we have questions that will place them into the grammar class and also advise them about other courses that we offer at the program. To replace our in-person orientation, we have a short and friendly welcome video. Here we have Angela, and we also give them some level materials to peruse. This is not part of the official guided self-placement, but it lets them orient to the class, and they can do that at any point. We have a little Google book and then a writing sample and some grammar. And I brought up the level 1, which is talking about San Francisco, the city of hills, because we will return to that in Angela's section of the presentation. And then after the GSP, we send them enrollment and orientation videos, and then the ESOL coach also gets in contact with them to see if they have questions about their placement, to advise them about classes, and to help them with the enrollment process as needed. So a question might come up about how many students actually enroll. And our prior process, that honorous success process, 55% of students who went through the placement would enroll in one of these classes. We do have other classes at our school that are not covered here, but these are the ones that are covered by the placement test. And currently 71% of our students who go through GSP place them or end up taking one of these classes. So there's also been other things happening in the past couple of years and changes to our program. So this is not solely due to GSP, I'm sure, but we are feeling that we're feeling positive that students are using these GSP results to take classes. And so now Angela is going to talk to you about how we have been validating our GSP. And I'll go ahead and do the slides for you, Angela.
Thank you, Beth. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be talking more about how our department has evaluated the overall effectiveness of our GSP tool and sharing future changes that we plan to make in response to our quantitative and qualitative findings. So before fully transitioning to guided self-placement in May 2020, we piloted a draft of our tool for a select number of incoming students. We also prepared a short survey for these students and their ESL instructors to determine the consequential validity of our new form of self-placement. And Beth, if you can click on the slides, thank you. So these results, the results we received by the end of the semester were incredibly positive, with instructors in our department confirming that 90% of our pilot students were succeeding at the level that they had selected. So, with such high percentage of our pilot GSP students excelling in the classroom, our next step was to take our tool online for all incoming students at the end of the semester. Since then, we have focused our efforts on compiling 2 different forms of complementary data. The first of these is the quantitative data compiled by our research and system technology analyst at Laney, Clifton Coleman. And this information allows us to see the results of our GSP tool in their totality, and ultimately determine the percentage of students who are accurately self-placing. So in writing, our results have continued to surpass previous numbers of overall effectiveness, with roughly 82% of students enrolled within 1 level of their self-assessment results. Thank you, Beth. So these results, which you can see on this screen now, have also made it clear where we might want to refine our tool. For instance, we can see that roughly 90% of level 0 and level 1 students self-place with accuracy, in comparison with 65% of level 2 students, which indicates the potential difficulties for self-placing for intermediate level students, and the need to revise some materials to clarify points of confusion. All right, our second means of evaluating the overall effectiveness of our GSP has been through one-on-one interviews conducted with students who recently took the GSP. These interviews, which Beth and I conducted this month, were designed to provide our department with qualitative data about the student experience. So we wanted to know how our students felt about their level, and ultimately if they had a positive experience with our GSP tool. To bring uniformity to the process, we prepared a set of 6 fixed questions, which allowed our interviewees to share their thoughts, reflect about their level, and share any suggestions for improving the tool. We chose to conduct one-on-one interviews because we felt that it gave us the flexibility to meet more students in a setting that highlighted their unique perspective. And to increase the authenticity of student voices, we also arranged for student ambassadors from our Welcome Center to serve as translators when requested. Actually, every one of our interviewees took advantage of this option. So we were able to conduct interviews in Spanish, Chinese, and Arabic. We also wanted to share all 6 questions. So maybe Beth, if you want to show all of them. Thank you. Yeah, so those are the 6 questions we asked our students. So as you can see, we asked them if they prefer a placement test or guided self-placement, if they think our GSP helped them find the right level of English, if they looked at the level materials on the website, if they have any suggestions for improving our tool, how they felt, if they felt nervous or relaxed. And finally, if we noticed that some students had enrolled in a different level than the one that they self-placed at, we asked them why. All right, so far we have conducted preliminary interviews and found that our students' experiences were very positive. For instance, one student with experience with both test-based and guided forms of placement stated that while both options are perfect, I think that I like choosing my level better. We also learned that level materials were a crucial part of the process with every one of the students that we interviewed, but one confirming that they had consulted the materials before self-placing. The impression left by the materials was most evident in the case of another student who proclaimed, "Yes, I remember, this is San Francisco. Yes, I remember hills." With considerable excitement when shown a reading from our GSP. And then a final highlights was the overall sense of comfort expressed by our students. While one student reported feeling nervous, the majority agreed that they felt relaxed when using the tool, or, between 1 and 5, most of them said a 3, a 4, or a 5. Which, this was a major point of emphasis when designing a process that will ultimately be more accessible and equitable for a diverse body of students. All right, so in addition to the positive feedback, our interviews also shed light on areas where we might want to continue to improve the overall effectiveness of our tool. So while our students appear to have a greater sense of comfort when completing the GSP, a number of them appear to be missing that same sense of certainty that comes from a teacher telling them what level to choose. In the words of one student, "I'm not sure myself which level I'm at, but a teacher has more experience, so I feel more confident with a teacher." All right, another student suggested adding even more content to our tools, such as videos, which may clarify even further the different self-placement steps. And finally, we also noticed a slight discrepancy between some of the students' GSP results and enrollment recommendations, which underscores the need to work a little more closely with our counselors. All right, and then moving forward, we have a few different ideas to improve the effectiveness of our tool. The most notable is the incorporation of a new option for students to attend a Zoom office hour with a Laney ESL instructor after completing the GSP. We hope that this will boost our students' overall sense of certainty when self-placing, And this will be supplemented with a face-to-face onboarding fair, which our department intends to host for the first time this upcoming spring. And another major point of emphasis that I think I saw in the chat earlier is establishing the positions that will be necessary to maintain and facilitate the GSP tool in the future. So among other things, we will need jobs to facilitate enrollment, answer student inquiries, and provide IT supports. These are objectives that are closely connected to our much bigger goal of fully institutionalizing our GSP at the district level by the end of next semester. So these are just of the changes that we have in mind, which concludes our part of the presentation. But if you have any questions, Beth and I would be happy to share more details about our work and experiences with GSP at Laney.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure you have quite a few questions in the chat, if you wouldn't mind trying to address those as we move forward. And I wanted to just take the last 10 minutes to make sure that Gabriel can share their experiences at Berkeley City College. So Gabriel, you should now have the remote.
Hey. Let me just, I'm gonna talk fast. I want to leave some time for out loud questions. And I just want to say that Berkeley City College, it's the same district as Laney. We have 4 colleges and it's a smaller college in ESL program. And like Beth and Angela, I'm only one person. My other main colleague, Lori Bryan, is also here and may chime in, and everything we have done is collaborative. So we're a little bit different population. We have only 2 levels below transfer, and we have a cohort transfer level English class that's housed in the English department. So we don't have the lower levels like Laney does. We have mirrored non-credit for all of our courses, and our college is about half international students before the pandemic. We also have really close ties to local high schools and the adult school, and we're working closely in the consortium before the pandemic. So this is gonna go really fast, but you'll get the thing in case you wanna see. This is, we just had a very long and winding placement journey, and we learned a lot all the way along the way. But like Laney and like a lot of schools, students first had to get past the CC apply, which is hard. And then they would take this paper, basically fill in the blank grammar test that was from the 80s, and do a writing sample that 2 teachers would score, and then go see a counselor, and then they would be able to enroll. So the whole thing, it was like they would come to campus, and it would be 2 hours or more to get through their placement thing. We got through a basic skills grant in 2009 and 10, we added this interactive orientation and one-on-one interview and advising, which were super valuable to have that human interaction with the ESOL teachers along the way. And then in around 2012, I will credit Lori Bryan and the RP group. We found at this conference this great idea of guided self-placement, but there wasn't much research how to, of ESL programs applying it. It was mostly math and English. But we gave it a try, and then the test changed, and then there was, it's just like an ongoing thing. There was this moment where there was gonna be a common assessment. And I think actually, even though that went away, the, what the common assessment, like all the research came out at the same time that actually a test is not a good way to place people. So that was really validating in our process. So we were able to replace that time and resources that the students would use taking a test with some other valuable orientation experience to welcome them into the college. Pre-pandemic, we were able to actually ditch all of the tests, including the writing sample, and we were doing a guided self-placement on paper, and then still having the person who was an ESL teacher help them, which was fantastic. But then it became the pandemic, and suddenly we had to put it online. What I wanted to tell you about, but I'm going to run out of time, is in a second, is that, you know, ultimately what we want to do is use the same one as Laney. So right now we have the same reading and writing samples, but it's a little bit different. And we're getting district support to do this, where they apply as soon as they go on to enroll in their classes. It's like, wait, you have to do this thing. And then there's someone to help them. And then they're automatically cleared, and it's all one smooth process. But we're not quite there yet. I also want to credit Cuyamaca. I saw their paper, Guided Self-Placement, and this does have the cognitive overload problem that Beth was talking about, because there's too much on one page. But that idea of start with a small thing, then go to the reading and see if you can do it. Then we saw the wonderful example of Woodland. And so when the pandemic hit and we suddenly had no resources and no infrastructure, and we had to put this online, I was able to just copy them and make a Google form with logic that populates to a spreadsheet, so we can see from the back end how the students placed. There's some other considerations, and I just want to say, since we've been doing this since 2013, we actually have had a lot of students take our guided self-placement for many years in various forms. And so it is a trove of only sadly anecdotal evidence. So it doesn't seem to have harmed students because completion and throughput are up, but there's so many other interventions that we've made along the way that it's probably not just because of the GSP. We have surveyed students and they think their classes are the right level, but we can't know who wasn't anymore in the class to take the thing. So, and unfortunately I have to skip that part, but actually I'm going to say this. When you're figuring out how to do this in your college, you may be faced with people, including yourself, like I was, who want to justify how it's okay by comparing it to how they did on another test. And so much research has come out that the other tests are not a good measure, that I know it's scary to just like let everything go and let them place themselves, but it actually, that's not the best way to test it. I just want to reiterate what the research shows, and what Laney said is that there are a few basic things, and other colleges have done this and it works, and people are willing to share their materials, and I wish everybody luck. And I hope that going forward, this can be like a new tradition in ESL. So thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. And thank you. Sorry you had to go so fast, but that was great information from all of our presenters. And I hope that a lot of the questions were able to be addressed in the chat as we went along. But as I mentioned, we have recorded this session, and we will post these slides, and we will post the guided self-placement user guide that is also highlights all of the information that Michelle shared at the beginning. And so we'll have that available on the RP group website, in addition to upcoming research in ESL, which will also be having additional webinars. So we are currently reviewing the ESL adoption plans that were all submitted by the colleges. We're running an analysis of KELS and AccuPlacer data that the Chancellor's Office was able to get from the vendors. And we're working on an analysis of international students to see how best to place that group of students as well. And all of the resources are available on the RP group website. And if you have any questions, you can email myself and Michelle directly. And then we hope to see you next Friday for another webinar on innovations and practices. We'll be joined by 4 colleges that have implemented innovative practices for their ESL departments. So thank you so much. And we hope that this was beneficial for everyone. And then a special thank you to all of our presenters for joining us today.